Hello, this is Dr. Jeffrey Thibert, Assistant Director of National Fellowships in the Center for Undergraduate Scholarly Engagement, or CUSE, at the University of Notre Dame. And in this video, I will be discussing the application process for the UK postgraduate scholarships at the University of Notre Dame. The goal for today is to talk a little bit about what the applications are actually like for these UK postgraduate scholarships, which include the Rhodes, the Marshall, the Mitchell, the Gates Cambridge, and the Churchill scholarships. And I will also talk about the actual timeline for applying at the University of Notre Dame, and we'll also have some time to talk about the personal statements for these scholarships, because that's one item that they all have in common. There are some additional elements to some of the applications, and we probably won't have time to go through that in this video, but there may be additional videos about those additional pieces, and those are of course things that we can also discuss one-on-one, either over Skype, email, in person, if you are applying for these. Now, I should note that this session is really designed for people who have already gone through the screening application process at Notre Dame. The way this works is that we have screening application deadlines in the late spring, and once you have submitted a screening application, which is sort of a very simplified version of the application for these awards, you would set up a time to meet with me to discuss the application process in more detail, and then that would be when you would ideally watch this video. So if you are at Notre Dame and you're interested in these one of these UK postgraduate scholarships and you haven't yet gone through the screening application process, I would encourage you to do so. I will show you here where the information is about this. If you go to fellows.nd.edu, you can see that right here, and you go to fellowships and then UK all, you will see pages here for each of these UK postgraduate scholarships. And if you follow any of these links, let's just use the Rhodes, and go near the bottom of the page, you will see where you can download the screening application instructions, advice for completing it, and the screening application form. So if you are interested in these awards and you haven't yet done this, you'll want to be sure to go through this process. It's really the formal beginning of the advising process for these awards. If you are just sort of initially interested in these awards, what I would encourage you to do is visit the YouTube page where you likely encountered this video, and there you should find an information session and a screening application workshop for the UK postgraduate scholarships, and I would encourage you to watch those videos and then contact me directly if you have any questions. My email address, the best way actually to get in touch with me is to email fellows, that's plural, at nd.edu. If you contact me that way, you can set up a meeting with me, or we can set up a time to talk about any questions you have before applying. But as I said, this session is really designed for people who have been through the screening application process, have committed to applying for one or more of these awards, and are looking for some more information about the applications. Now, where I would like to start is by talking about the key application components. We'll start there, and there are some differences between the applications for these awards, and so I want to make sure that the differences are clear at this stage in the process. One thing I should note is that if you have been through the screening application process, you will receive a package of information from me or from the fellowships office that will contain a set of application advice along with additional information about the process. So that's something that If you haven't received that yet, you should be receiving it relatively soon, within the next week or two, and that will capture some of the information we talk about here, but it will also give details about the timeline, the application components. But I just want to go over those here to make sure that they're clear. If at any point as you're watching this video, if you do have questions, you can of course pause it, go back and review things. You can email me at fellows@nd.edu. So all of these scholarships have standard biographical information. You would submit transcripts for these awards. That's something they all have in common. Where they differ is with some of the additional material you have to submit. So for the Rhodes Scholarship, you have to submit what they call a list of principal activities. This is typically a 2-page document, and it is essentially a resume, but they do say it's a list of principal activities, and so you would not just be putting research or employment experience on here, but it could also list other activities that you've been involved in, such as athletics or other kinds of student organizations, if you've had leadership roles. And one thing you can do with this list is actually give some additional detail about the activities that you've done. So this doesn't have to be just a list. It can be a kind of almost an annotated list of your principal activities. They're most interested in the activities that you have been involved in since the beginning of your undergraduate education, although if there's something especially significant that predates that, especially if you want to show a kind of extended commitment to some cause or some sport or something like that, then it would make sense to include high school activities there too. But you'll typically only want to do that if it connects to something that you are something that you've done in college, or if it was really exceptional. So you submit the list of principal activities, you submit a 1,000-word personal statement, which we'll talk about later, and you submit 5 to 8 letters of recommendation. And in the application package you will receive, if you're applying through Notre Dame, you'll get some additional information about these letters. There's also information about the letters in the screening application if you haven't seen it yet. But the bottom line is, with the letters for this and for the other awards, you are going to want to try to obtain letters from people who can best comment on your fit for this particular scholarship, and people who can confirm and elaborate on some of the key experiences that you'll be discussing in the application. So if a particular leadership experience is going to play a central role in your application, if it's something you're going to discuss in your personal statement, for instance, and you're going to claim that you've had some kind of impact through that experience, it's useful then to have a letter from someone who can confirm that you had that impact and perhaps talk about that impact in more detail. You will essentially be limited to the 2-page list and the 1,000-word personal statement for the Rhodes, so the letter writers can actually supplement that material with additional information. So that's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about who will do your 5 to 8 letters, who you'll ask for those letters from. You want to make sure that they can speak to things that are in your application and things that will make you a good fit for this particular opportunity. So that's the Rhodes Scholarship. The Marshall Scholarship also includes a 1,000-word personal statement. You do not submit a separate list of principal activities or a resume for the Marshall Scholarship, but you will enter some of that information into the application form that you will complete. You generally don't get quite as much room to expand on your activities in the Marshall application, but there is some room for that. So it's very likely that you know, if you prepare a list of activities for the Rhodes, you would also then be able to use pieces of that for the Marshall. So there's the personal statement for Marshall, which is also 1,000 words. And then there are two additional essays that are unique to the Marshall Scholarship application. One is a proposed academic program essay, where you will discuss your proposed academic programs that are part of the application. So for the Rhodes Scholarship, you typically will discuss in the personal statement why you are choosing a particular course of study at Oxford, especially for your first year there. Rhodes Scholarships are typically for 2 years, occasionally 3, but usually 2. So that's usually something for the Rhodes that you fold into the personal statement. Often people will have a paragraph where they talk about that, a paragraph or 2. But for the Marshall Scholarship, you actually write an entirely separate essay, and you have to explicitly state in the application form which programs you are interested in pursuing should you receive the Marshall Scholarship, and you're kind of locked in to those program choices. So for Marshall, it's very important that you be clear about the programs that you would want to pursue when you're in the UK. You ideally need a first and second choice for the first and second year of the Marshall Scholarship. If you are applying for a 1-year Marshall Scholarship because you are deferring, you might be deferring admission to med school to do the Marshall Scholarship, and you can only do a 1 year, then of course you would just propose one program as your first choice, one as your second choice. But often for the 2-year Marshall Scholarship, people will propose 2 1-year programs as first choices and 2 1-year programs for second choices. So you have to, again, choose these wisely, because you have to then write 500 words about why you are interested in these programs. And that's something, we won't talk probably much about this essay here, but that is something we will discuss if you are applying for the Marshall Scholarship, and the package you get will have more information about this essay. But you would almost think of it as a graduate school, as part of a graduate school application. Why are you interested in these programs? Are there particular people there you want to study with? Is there certain kind of research going on? Are these the leading places to study these topics? Is there something geographically about where the universities are located that is of interest to you? If you're combining 2 programs, doing 1 year here, 1 year somewhere else, why that combination? These are the kind of things you will discuss there. The Marshall Scholarship also has a third essay, which is the ambassadorial potential essay, and this is especially unique to the Marshall Scholarship, and it ties in with one of their key criteria, which is ambassadorial potential. And what they're interested in is how you see yourself contributing to the special relationship between the US and the UK. So they ask you how you understand that special relationship, and then how you see yourself playing a role in that relationship. And that doesn't have to be politically or through policy or international relations. It might be through a scientific field, for instance, because you're going to foster international collaboration in research, and maybe this is something that has been going on for a long time between the US and the UK, and you want to fit into that. You know, your reasoning is going to be different depending on what you want to do, but it's important that you have a convincing reason for why you see yourself as having ambassadorial potential. This criteria is not part of any of these other applications, and it's something that really makes the Marshall different. One way to think about this essay is that the funding for the Marshall Scholarship comes from the British government. And so you can assume that, in a sense, British taxpayers are contributing to the Marshall Scholarship funds. And so if you were in the UK and somebody found out that you were a Marshall Scholar on the street, they might ask, well, why was it worth us bringing you here? Why is it worth having the UK fund your education here? What are you bringing to the UK? How are you contributing to, given that you're probably going to return to the US, why is it worth us having you here? That's the kind of thing you would be talking about in this essay. So how will you be able to make connections with people in the UK? How will you foster long-standing connections between the places in your career, in your field? That's what this essay is all about. And I will say, You may have a very strong application in other ways, but if this essay is weak, if it's clear that you don't have a strong sense of how you're going to contribute to the UK, if it appears that you're just going to take advantage of the education, but then not give anything back to the place, you would be unlikely to advance further in the process. So this is a very important essay for the Marshall Scholarship. In addition, you'll need 4 letters of recommendation, and each letter can be only up to 1,000 words. There isn't a length limit on the Rhodes Scholarship letters, although typically anything more than 3 pages is probably too long, and I think the average letter is 1.5 to 2 pages, but and that includes letterhead typically. But for the Marshall, they do restrict the letters to 1,000 words each, but here you only need 4. So again, you want to think about who will best be able to speak about your academic merit, your leadership potential, and your ambassadorial potential. Now for the Mitchell Scholarship, the personal statement is 1,000 words, as with Rhodes and Marshall. You will also need 4 letters of recommendation. In the past, they've limited these to 750 words, so they're shorter letters, and I believe this will continue to be the case. And that's really the bulk of the Mitchell application. You will enter some information about your experience and your awards in the body of the Mitchell Scholarship form, but the heart of the application here is the 1,000-word statement and the 4 letters. Now the Gates Scholarship, you will submit a Cambridge graduate application, and it should be clear by now if you've gone through the process this far. For the Gates supplementary portion of the graduate application, you submit a 500-word personal statement and 1 additional letter of recommendation. And these are a little different than the others in that they are explicitly meant to talk about how you meet the Gates-Cambridge criteria. So in the other personal statements, you of course want to talk about things that show how you demonstrate the criteria, but it's usually not as explicit. In Gates, the prompt is very explicit. They want to know how you meet their criteria, and the letter of recommendation is supposed to also discuss how you meet those criteria. They call it a personal reference. It does still have to be from someone you know in a professional capacity, but it could be from an advisor. It could be from a faculty member who might be outside of your proposed graduate field but can still talk about you as a person. That's what you want to be thinking of there. Finally, the Churchill Scholarship, you do submit a personal statement, which is 2 pages, single-spaced maximum, and that's about 1,000 words. It might be a little bit more than 1,000 words, maybe 1,200, 1,300, but it's around 1,000. And then you submit 3 additional pieces in addition to 4 letters of recommendation. You submit a 1-page listing of your scholarships, prizes, awards, and other distinctions. You submit a 1-page listing of your research and employment experience. So this is kind of like your 2-page list of principal activities for the Rhodes, but broken up differently. And then you submit a 1-page proposed program of study document, which is like the proposed academic program essay for the Marshall Scholarship. So you will note that while the personal statement isn't common and you need letters of recommendation for all of these, there are ways that these applications differ. And for most of our time remaining here, we'll be talking really about the personal statement, since it is something that all of these have in common. But if you are applying for the Churchill, if you are applying for the Marshall, we may have additional videos focusing just on these, and of course you and I can discuss these things too at other times. Now, the next thing I want to talk about briefly is the timeline. As I said, screening application deadlines are in late spring. And then over the summer, and typically people apply kind of in between junior and senior year. So the process starts near the end of junior year, really near the second semester of junior year, and it finishes in the first semester of your senior year. However, because of the eligibility windows on these, people do often apply starting at the end of their senior year, and you can apply typically as an alum. Rhodes, you can't have turned 24 by October 1st of the application year. Marshall, you can apply within basically if your graduation has been within the past, if you graduated in one of the past 2 or 3 classes, you can apply for that. So in this case, this video is being recorded in 2014, so you would be able to apply if you had graduated in 2012 or 2013 or 2014. That's just an example. Mitchell, you have until you're 30 by October 1st. Gates, there's no limit, and Churchill, you have until you're 26. Although the vast majority of Churchill scholars are either graduating seniors or recent alumni who have not yet begun graduate study. It is very rare for a current graduate student to receive the Churchill Scholarship, although that could happen. So the way the timeline goes is that over the summer, this is where the bulk of the application work tends to happen, and you will have the opportunities to submit drafts of your application for feedback over the summer. You will submit them to fellows at nd.edu. Information about the process will be included in the package you will get from us. But one thing I should note is that there is a rule with the Rhodes and Mitchell scholarships where you are not allowed to have anyone review your personal statement at any point. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have brainstorming conversations about the personal statement, that you couldn't talk about it generally. You could ask someone, if they think you're headed in the right direction, if they think this might be an interesting angle to take in the statement, but you can't have anyone review it. So if you are applying for Rhodes or Mitchell, then over the summer during these feedback deadlines, you cannot submit the personal statement for feedback. Now that's even if you are also applying for the Marshall Scholarship, which of course doesn't have the rule, but chances are you would be using a similar personal statement for Rhodes and Marshall, and so unless you were writing a Marshall Scholarship statement from scratch, you could not submit a Marshall personal statement for feedback if you are also applying for Rhodes or Mitchell. Now, what will happen is if you are applying for Rhodes or Mitchell, we will still check in at around those feedback deadlines to talk about how your application is progressing. If you are just applying for Marshall, Gates, or Churchill, then we can discuss your entire application. You can submit the entire thing for feedback. And of course, we can also discuss the pieces of your application that are unique to Marshall, Gates, and Churchill if you are also applying for Rhodes or Mitchell. So you would be getting feedback over the summer at these set times, and of course you can always be in touch with me with questions. There may be additional workshops held online over the summer, and then in mid-August typically, mid to late August is when the campus deadline is, and by this time you'd be expected to submit a complete version of your application to CUSE, and this will be done electronically, and again you'll get information about this in the application advice package you'll be receiving, or you may already have received, but this is really the key deadline because you'll need to have everything ready by then. Now, if for some reason a letter won't be ready by then, maybe because it's based on something you've done over the summer and there wasn't time for the person to submit the letter by August 19th, that's okay. But you should have as much of your application as possible in by then, and that would include the majority of the letters. This is important because a campus committee will be reviewing the material and interviewing you in early September if you are applying for Rhodes, Marshall, or Mitchell. If you are just applying for Churchill, then there will be no interviews, but your written application will be reviewed to determine whether you are one of 2 university nominees, and then you'll receive further information about the process if you are. If you're just applying for Gates, you actually don't have to follow the campus deadline because there's no endorsement process for the Gates. You apply directly to Cambridge. So while you could submit something to get feedback, the campus deadline does not hold for you. For Rhodes, Marshall, Mitchell, there will be these interviews, and a committee will determine whom to endorse from the university. There's no limit on the number of people, but they do typically try to only endorse individuals who they think will have a good chance at the next level of competition. At that point, you would then be able to make some additional revisions to your application, although you still would not receive feedback on the personal statement if you're applying for Rhodes or Mitchell. And final deadlines for Rhodes, Marshall, Mitchell are in very late September. And for Gates, the deadline's October 15th, and for Churchill, you have to submit the Cambridge application by October 15th, and then the Churchill application by the second Tuesday in November. But you will know if you are one of the Churchill nominees in early September, so if you are applying for Churchill, you might hold off on the Cambridge part of the application until you know whether you are a nominee. So that's the timeline, and of course you can pause this, go back, view it again if you'd like. If any of this is unclear, you might refer to the application package you will receive, you might email me. But now let's talk a little bit about the personal statement, because again, this is what these awards have in common, and this is what we'll talk about for the remainder of the time we have, and of course we can always follow up later. Now, what I want to do is give some general advice about personal statements, and then briefly review some examples of personal statements that have been successful. Now, I'm a little hesitant to show the examples typically because I don't want you to think that there is a formula for these things, because there's not. And I think the Rhodes and Mitchell rules about not having anyone review your application really reinforces that, honestly, because part of their motivation for the rule change was that they were getting applications or getting personal statements that were very formulaic, that tended to follow a kind of similar path. Like there was some kind of pattern you had to adhere to, that there was some right way to do a Rhodes or Mitchell essay. And what they really want to see, and this may be the one overriding thing to remember, what they really want to see is an authentic individual voice here. They want you to tell a story about yourself that explains who you are, what you care about, why you're interested in this opportunity, and what makes you unique. You know, you are essentially trying to convince them that they should want to talk to you over the other applicants they're going to get. They get amazing applicants for these awards, really strong applicants across the board. And part of what you need to do in the personal statement is show them what makes you literally outstanding, what makes you exceptional, why is your story kind of unique in some way. For instance, they might get, you know, 30 applications, let's say, where people are talking about wanting to work in the area of international development. That's a more common pursuit for people. Well, what makes your take on it different? What's going to make your approach to development, your experiences, different from perhaps the other 29 people who will be applying and saying this is what they want to do? Often entrepreneurship, microfinancing, these are also somewhat common things to be interested in these days. They're good things, but they are more common. And so let's say 20 people were applying and saying they were interested in microfinancing initiatives or social entrepreneurship. What makes your approach to that different? Have you had certain experiences that are probably going to differ from other people's? Do you have some idea about that makes you stand out? This is what you want to do in the statement, and hopefully your letters of recommendation will contribute to this. You're fundamentally trying to show them that you're exceptional, that you are outstanding, that you've done something so far that's really extraordinary. And then you would hope that the recommendation letters would support that vision of you. Now, in general, there seem to be multiple kinds of applications that are, of course, successful in getting interviews. Often, in some cases, somebody has done one really huge thing that has been, supported by other things they've done, but there have been kind of one amazing accomplishment. They were first author on a journal article on a leading scientific journal. They started some organization that has raised $1 million. They founded a nonprofit. These kinds of things. Now that alone isn't necessarily going to mean that you're successful, but that is one thing that sometimes people who get interviews have in common. They've done one really big thing. And the other kind of application that's often successful is people who have done an interesting combination of things. So you might be exceptional because you've done this one huge thing that nobody else is going to have done who's applying. But you might be exceptional because you've done some combination of things, some set of internships over the summer, some collection of research experiences that other people are unlikely to have done. So whatever it might be, you want to be thinking about what's going to make your narrative different. What are the things in your story that are going to be unique? So now, when you're approaching the personal statement, when you're thinking about how to write this, it's a difficult thing because you've got 1,000 words in most cases. You typically don't have a really explicit prompt here. They want to know who you are and how you think and what your values and commitments are. But it's really about you. So you're kind of trying to tell a 1,000 word. You're trying to write a 1,000 word autobiography that is focused on how you want to make a mark on the world and how you are exceptionally well suited to do it. So one note is that, and this we're kind of going to go through some bullet points that most personal statements that are successful in moving someone to interview have in common. One thing is an interesting or catchy beginning that somehow relates to the theme of the personal statement. Now, we'll talk about what I mean by theme in a minute, but they have said that part of the formula for these, the Rhodes people have said this, is, you start with some dramatic story that kind of tugs on the heartstrings or paints some beautiful image, and that can be a valid way to start, but they do see a lot of essays like that. So that might be one way to have a catchy beginning, but there are other approaches to that, and we'll see some in some of the examples we look at, but one approach is just state from the beginning what your mission is. I want to do this. I care about this. Another way is to tell perhaps a story, but one that's a little bit more matter of fact, that isn't meant to be this evocative thing. I stood on the savannah in Africa and I contemplated the mystery of maybe something not as dramatic as that, but something that's a little bit more matter of fact. I first realized that this was a problem when I had this experience. You might start, I've seen people start with a line of dialogue. So, they're having a conversation with someone. Some people kind of set the scene. If most of their work has taken place in a particular setting, they might have an opening line that kind of introduces you to that setting. Again, what you want to aim for here is something that's going to give the reviewers pause in a good way, because they're going to be reviewing a lot of essays. That's a given. And so you want to make sure that when they get to yours, they stop and think, oh, this is really interesting. This is something that's going to grab their attention. And again, it shouldn't be in a cloying kind of way, but it should be something that is interesting, that's really compelling. Now, once you've kind of had this interesting beginning, I mean, it might be a couple sentences, it might be a whole paragraph. Relatively early on in the statement, you typically want to introduce somehow your mission. This might be the theme of the essay. What are you about? What do you want to accomplish? What do you care about? What is the thing that matters most to you? What might that be? Now, there are many different ways you could go about doing this, but you want to make sure that your goal, your aim, the way that you hope to make a mark on the world is pretty clear. Because the reviewers are going to be looking for this. They're going to want to have a sense of, what you want to achieve. And it could be anything. I mean, it could be a very general kind of theme. It might be something more specific. It might be something related to research. It might be something related to activism. It might be something related to politics. It could really run the gamut here. It might be something related to education or some other kind of public service, military. But it's how you want to make a mark. And then it's usually helpful to give them a sense of why. So typically, the most interesting parts of an application, of a personal statement, are the whys. I did this thing, but why? Now, they're going to have a list. They're going to have a set of experiences. They're going to know what you've done already from that. The personal statement gives you a chance to explain why. So you state your mission, you're clear about what you care about, and then you can talk about why you care about this thing. Have you always been interested in this? Were there certain experiences you had? Was it kind of a set of experiences that led you to an interest in this? Why do you care about this? And once you've done that, you can then talk about how you've made progress toward your mission. So, this is what I care about. Here's how I became interested in the thing. And now here's what I have started to do about it. It's usually helpful if you're able to talk about key experiences you've had that demonstrate your commitments to certain values, issues, causes, whatever it might be, certain research pursuits. You want to tell them the story of this progress. And you can think of this as connecting the dots. So you're going to have a number of dots, your list of activities. But what you do in the personal statement is you connect those dots. And it may not always be a straight line. You might have done some things that wouldn't normally seem to kind of fit a coherent narrative, but you could make them fit sometimes in a personal statement. You also might not talk about certain things if they don't kind of fit the story you're trying to tell here. It's really all about connecting the dots. Show them that you've got a mission. Here's how you became interested, and here's how I've started to make progress toward that. Here's what I've done. This is the part typically where you talk about the experiences you've had that really qualify you to do something about this, that show that you are poised to become someone who's going to make a mark on the world, who's going to reshape the way something is done or have a major influence on something. Now, typically also, you will talk about how the scholarship is going to enable you to kind of take the next step. So I've made this progress toward my mission, and when I go to Oxford, when I go to Cambridge, this will happen. And then this is where I hope it will take me. It's usually useful to have some sense of your career goals here. And it's useful often to be as specific as you can be. You don't necessarily have to have a single path nailed down. But they do like to see people with ambition. Typically, people who have a sense of how they're going to make their mark and have really been thoughtful about it and have started to think about this. And of course, it might change. You're not held to anything that's in the statement, but have you thought about it? Are you ambitious? Have you considered how you're going to make these kinds of changes that you're proposing to make? That's usually in the personal statement somewhere too. Now, I will say, for a Marshall personal statement, you will have a whole essay to talk about your academic program, so you may not need to talk about that as much in the personal statement. It's usually helpful to reference why you're studying in the UK, why this is part of your story, but you don't want to repeat yourself if you have multiple essays, but that typically needs to be in there somewhere. And then it's nice often if the end kind of connects up to the beginning. It doesn't have to, but that will often leave a reader with a kind of a sort of a sense of closure if the ending has some kind of link to the beginning. And part of the reason for that is it will make the personal statement seem well planned. That you didn't just start with some opening story because you thought it was dramatic, but it really did connect to your theme. So much so that you can go back at the end and refer back to that story and kind of reinforce the point you're trying to make. These essays are not things you typically sit down and write overnight or the week before. Not that that couldn't happen, maybe it could, but usually most of the time, these are essays that are really organically develop. Often people will write multiple drafts and find, that some pieces of some drafts work, some pieces don't. Brainstorming is an incredibly important part of the process. Sit down and try to write down what you are about. Try to write down what are some key experiences I want to talk about. What's going to make me different? What is the story I want to tell? Can you tell that story in even a paragraph? Can you really sum it up? You might one trick is to go to the pages for the Rhodes Scholarship, the Marshall Scholarship. You'll be able to find profiles of past scholars there. Read their bios and think, if I was going to write a bio like that about myself, what would it say? That might be a kind of core that you build the personal statement around. What would your blurb look like? What would your 200-word bio look like? A lot of the effort here, I think, can take place in the pre-writing. Just brainstorm. Just let yourself come up with ideas. Devote a considerable amount of time just to that. Don't censor yourself. Don't limit yourself. Just write down what you think is interesting. Think about experiences you've had, and really try to think back and remember. Maybe there are some interesting things you could talk about in the personal statement. And again, really discern and reflect on what you care about and what your motivation is, and then what you've done to show that you care about that thing. If you say you're interested in global health, but you don't have anything on your record academically in terms of service, in terms of research, that indicates you really care about global health, they're going to be skeptical. They're going to wonder if you really do care about this thing because you haven't talked about it. If you really have an interest in being a leader in some way, it will be helpful to refer to some kind of leadership experiences you've had. If you want to have some kind of policy impact, have you already started to do something like that? These are the kind of ways you want to be thinking. Again, you want to convince the reviewers that you're someone who's going to make a mark on the world and that you've already started to work toward this. Ideally, you can show them that you've already had some kind of impact, even on a on a local level or a very small scale, and that you have a sense of how you're going to take that local impact and make it global. That's the kind of thing you want to be doing here. Now, we'll look at some samples now in the time we have left. But again, I don't want you to feel wedded to these. These are not even, I wouldn't say these are even models of what to do. These all have been successful in moving the person to interview, but there isn't just one way to do this. And what's going to matter most is that you present yourself authentically in the essay. Because if you are following a formula and it's not really representing who you are, if they invite you to an interview and you don't match up with the essay, you'll probably have no chance. You really need to, they're going to invite you to interview based on what they see in the written application. That's why you're there. That's what they like. And your best chance is if you match up with what you are showing them in the written essay. So, make sure it represents your voice, that it's authentic. Think of it as, you're having an intelligent conversation with intelligent people, that they asked you, well, tell me about yourself. What would you say if you had 1,000 words to do that? Okay, let's look at some quick samples. Here's one. And you can always, of course, pause this and read this over if you would like. What I think we can note about this is that it does start with a kind of story, but this is a more matter-of-fact story. It's sort of it's an interesting way to introduce the theme, and you'll see that really the real theme kind of comes out in the first paragraph, beginning of second paragraph here, and really then throughout the second paragraph. Here the person is stating the problem and talking a little bit about how they came to understand that this was a problem. Now, what this allows the person to do is, one, be pretty clear about what the mission is, but two, show that they know something about it. There's a lot of interesting, rich details here that show that this is a person who really has done research. This is somebody who really understands this issue. And this person is trying in these first couple paragraphs, I think, to show why the person came to care about this and why it matters. Now, moving down, you'll see that after the initial two paragraphs, the research itself. So what did this person do? This you might think of as progress toward mission, connecting the dots. And here you'll see that there's partial discussion of the summer research and what the person learned from it. Again, this is progress. So it's not just I did this, but what you got out of it. What role did it play in your trajectory? Talk about that. And here the person talks about other experiences they had, not just in summer research, but on campus. And they're showing how these things fit together. Study abroad, research on campus, how these things link up. Although this person is clearly interested in a particular region, the larger theme seems to be an interest in regions that experience conflict. So then here, there's some additional discussion of what the person has done, Northern Ireland, Croatia, that gives some additional progress toward the mission. And then this even continues here. Talking more about programs the person has been involved with. But again, note that they are bringing in a lot of experiences here, but they're connecting the dots. So all of these things would be on the list of activities that would accompany this essay. But here the person is saying, here's why I did all this stuff. Here's how it kind of works together toward my theme. Now, in the next two paragraphs, starting with in the future and I will prepare myself, this is the, where I want to be 5 years from now and how Oxford, in this case, is going to get me there. Again, not a whole lot about this. It's only a 1,000 word statement, but enough here to give the reviewers a chance to see what the person's planning to do, why they want to be at Oxford, what's going to be useful there, and then also what is going to follow that. What is this person's idea for making a mark? And then this last paragraph is sort of a nice roundup, a nice reassertion of the person's main theme, and a little finishing line here about how the Rhodes Scholarship is going to help. And this does, of course, connect back to the opening paragraph in a thematic way. So, again, this is what an essay like this looks like. Now, in the end, you want it to read as if it's a very natural thing. But I guarantee you this essay took a lot of work. And a big trick is getting everything you want to say into 1,000 words. That is quite difficult to do. So you'll have to kind of pick and choose. You'll have to decide, what experiences are most unique that I might want to talk more about. What things, in this case, International Scholars Africa Working Group, there's not really as much here about what the person did here, although that was probably on the list of principal activities. But here, the decision was made not to go into as much detail about what was learned from each of these individual things. However, there was more discussion of what she learned from the things that were maybe most relevant to her point: Sierra Leone, Northern Ireland, Croatia. So this is one essay. Now, let's look at another one right here. Now, this one is a little bit different because it's more, in a way, it's more of a think piece, you might say. I think it's more of a personal essay than perhaps the other one. But maybe this makes sense because you see the person aspires to be an essayist. And this is a person who had published some essays and articles in the past. And so that would explain the tone here. So it's a very different tone, but still it was successful in getting an interview. And what this might illustrate is that you want to go with a tone that fits you. After reading this essay, you would probably expect a certain kind of person, probably a different kind of person than you would expect from the other essay. That's good. You want a personality to come out of this. All you can do is give them a sense of who you are, what you care about, how you think, and then see whether they want to interview you. They might not, but that's okay if they don't. It's their loss, really. But you want to give them the best sense of who you are as you can, and then go from there. Because, as I said, if in person you don't match up with what's on the page, you will not be selected. So in this essay, here we have this is not really a story so much as an illustrative observation, and it's meant to kind of introduce this person's mission, which we really get in the beginning of the second paragraph, but then we get more detail about what that means. So this moment of collected pause is exactly what I want to cultivate. Well, what does that mean? Well, we go on to find out a little bit more. Aims to be a compelling voice in the fight for healthcare. So here, again, we see, an interesting beginning, leading to a discussion of the theme, leading to a further discussion of why this is important. And then as this person is kind of talking about why this is important, this person's working in other things that they've done. The study of the classics, volunteering in Haiti. Again, tying these things into the person's interest. We get a discussion of what the person wants to accomplish at Oxford. They've already begun discussion with people about what they might do there. That's not necessary, but it doesn't hurt if you have something like that. It might show an additional bit of motivation. And then we go on to get more discussion of this person's experience. Now, I think what I want to really note here is that this is a very different kind of essay than the one we just looked at. The other one is a little bit more, I think, experience based. I did these things, and here's how they tied in with my family. Here's what I learned from them. Here we're getting a little bit more of a reflection on a theme, but we are still getting discussions of things this person has done. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of things this person did that don't show up in here. This person made a conscious choice to select certain key experiences that are really relevant here. And so, we still get this basic idea of an interesting beginning, a statement of mission, an explanation of why this is important, and sort of how this person came to discover it was important, and how this person came to see the issue as complex through various experiences. Haiti, working at the UK Department of Health, Wireless Health Institute. This person was already, had just begun, I believe, medical school. So, again, tying all these things together, that's what you want to do here. Now let's look at, we have a little bit more time, so let's look at a few more. Okay. Here, the opening again. Interesting opening, kind of a little bit of humor here at the beginning. And we get this idea about leadership, order to accomplish a mission, and then boom, second paragraph, mission, public service through politics. And we immediately, and this is very much an experience essay. I joined College Democrat, I did this, here's what I saw, then the following spring I joined Circle K and I did this. And here we're getting at the issue of really addressing poverty. Through political work. That's kind of the theme that comes out here. And we're getting the story of how this person pursued this as an undergraduate. College Democrats, Circle K, and of course you can pause this if you'd like to read it over, that's fine. And then kind of an interesting point about the passion for politics being tempered by realism. This is an interesting way of demonstrating how you think, I think. So we're getting this discussion of experiences, and then we're getting a sort of interruption here, showing that this person did these things but was thoughtful about them. So again, it's the experiences you had, but it's what you learned. Try to take the reviewers through the process of how your thinking developed. So maybe you knew this was the thing I cared about, and then I pursued these things, but here's how I came to think about these things more deeply over my undergraduate years. It might be an issue of maybe you didn't know your mission right away, and part of this is the story of how you came to understand that your mission was a certain thing. I knew I was interested in this thing, so I pursued this opportunity, but this opportunity, this internship, opened up a number of questions for me, and so I pursued these. So maybe it's that kind of thing. Either way, again, it's connecting the dots. All of these things, Circle K, working for the Democratic nominee for mayor in South Bend, the Obama campaign, all this stuff was on this person's list, guaranteed. They did an internship at a political consulting firm, worked for Senator Durbin, that's all on the list. But here we're getting the context, we're getting what the person learned, how the person's thinking developed as a result of these activities. And then, third from last, at Oxford, I want to do this. And what's interesting is that there isn't a whole lot about Oxford here. There's a little bit here on what the person wants to do at Oxford, a little bit about the PPE program. Note that the person is mentioning neglected communities like Maria's, which is a callback to earlier in the essay, so this kind of rounds out discussion of leadership again, which was what came up in the first paragraph. But, again, it's very much about using the experiences you've had, using certain key experiences you've had to demonstrate how your thinking about some issue has developed, and then reinforcing how this experience, time in Oxford, is going to enable you to kind of take the next step. Let's look at another essay. Here we get, again, a story, but this is, again, a more it's a little bit more of an emotional story, but it's not told in an overly emotional way. It's really meant to kind of introduce a really significant experience the person has had. And this was something the person started in pre-college, and so maybe that's why it comes up first. Again, this story introduces the theme right here at the end, a way to expand the reach of healthcare beyond traditional centers. And then we see, the person then became interested in global healthcare. And in the second paragraph, we really get the kind of mission statement. This might be a really clear mission statement for the person. A combination of clinical medicine with a graduate degree in health sciences would allow me to contribute to the current healthcare debate more fully in a practical as well as a theoretical way. Well, how did this thinking develop? How did the person come to realize is what they wanted to do? Well, they talk about internships they've done. They then talk about, there's a little more focus here on how Oxford and the Rhodes Scholarship will allow the person to further their thinking on this. This person was an alum and so was currently working for a consulting firm, so that was incorporated into this. This person had to kind of explain what they had done, what they were doing right then. We get more here at the end about the specific goal of the person to open a clinic, and then again at the end, a connection back to why the Rhodes Scholarship is important. Now, if you're interested in seeing some additional essays, we do have some on file in the CUSE office. You're welcome to consult them. But, I think if you keep in mind that what you're really trying to do is give them a sense of what your mission is, why you came to care about it, how you've made progress toward that mission, and how Oxford, the Rhodes Scholarship, the Marshall Scholarship, whatever it might be, is going to contribute to your path toward making a mark, then you've got the framework of an essay right there. So I would reflect on those questions, brainstorm, just jot things down, do it on the computer, do it by hand, whatever is more creative for you, and start there. And then from those pieces, start to write some paragraphs. Start to think about how things fit together. Try to think of an interesting way to tell your story, but remember that throughout, what you want to do is highlight what's really exceptional about you. What is going to make this an interesting story? If somebody's reading 100 essays like this, what's going to make yours different? That's what you're aiming for here in the personal statement. I will leave you with that. Of course, if you have any questions, you can email me at fellows@nd.edu. If you've completed the screening application process, you will be receiving an advice package from me relatively soon if you haven't already. And if you have not yet done the screening application, be sure to go to the Fellows website and get that material and complete the application. I hope this has been useful for you, and I look forward to hopefully working with you in the months or weeks ahead. So thank you very much.